curled in the far corner, skin pale. Black hair braided in the Apache style. One arm wrapped around a newborn, the other trembling. Blood streaked the hay. Not fresh, but not old either. The baby whimpered. Lips were blue, skin puckered from cold. Samuel froze. He could walk away. Let the storm do what war hadn't. Let the land bury them in silence like it had buried Clara. But his feet stayed put. "Stay here," he told the girl. Inside the cabin, he lit the stove, boiled water, grabbed the wool blanket from his bed. When he returned, the girl hadn't moved. She stood like a soldier, guarding the ones she loved. "Wrap the baby tighter," he said. "Good. Now help me move your mama." She looked at him, puzzled. "Are you mad?" "I'm not kind enough to be mad," he said, "but I'm not cruel enough to let her die." Together, they lifted the woman, Nita. He carried her into the warmth. The baby cried. The fire cracked. The silence he'd lived with for 5 winters was broken not by grief, but by the sound of life, fragile and real. Samuel didn't know yet that this woman had a mark on her wrist that would tear open every scar he thought had healed. That she carried not only a child, but the memory of a man Samuel once hunted through blood-soaked canyons. Coming up next, the moment Samuel sees the mark, and what it reveals about her past and his. And you, where are you watching this from tonight? Somewhere snowy, somewhere quiet, or somewhere warm with your own stories buried deep? Let us know in the comments, because this tale of mercy, memory, and love born in the cold is just beginning. "You're Apache," he said, and the woman didn't flinch. She just nodded, slow and silent, as if she already knew the cost of being seen. The stove crackled. Outside, the snow hissed against the roof, relentless. Inside the barn's old bunk room, Samuel knelt beside the cot, watching her, this woman who had collapsed in his hay with blood between her legs and a baby in her arms. She was breathing now, shallow, but steady. Her name was Nita, and she was Apache. That alone should have been enough to make him walk out. 5 winters ago, he wouldn't have hesitated. 5 winters ago, he might have pulled his revolver. But 5 winters ago, Clara was still alive. Clara, who had looked up at him with confusion more than fear when the arrow struck her chest. Clara, who had whispered Samuel before crumpling beside the corral. Since then, Samuel had lived in the after the laughter, after the warmth, after the war. But now Nita lay here, alive, injured, a child barely breathing in her arms, and her daughter, Lena, sitting by her side like a sentinel. As the fire warmed the room and the kettle began to whistle, Samuel stood slowly. He moved to refill the stove with another log when he saw it. Her blanket had slipped. On the inside of her wrist, half faded, was a mark he hadn't seen in years. 2 arrows crossing beneath the sun. Not just any tribal symbol, it was Wya's mark, the bloodline of the man who had led the Red Creek resistance. The war chief who'd stood against 30 cavalrymen and never took a step back. The one whose name mothers whispered when the fires got too low and fear crept in. Wya, whose men had raised settlements, whose arrows had taken Clara. "You were his wife," Samuel said, voice tight. Nita didn't speak, but her eyes met his, unblinking. He stepped back, suddenly aware of the cold seeping into his bones despite the fire. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered. "You should be far from this place." She swallowed hard. "I tried." Her voice was rough, cracked like dry riverbed stone. "The child came early. We were turned away from every trading post. I walked until I bled. Then I couldn't walk anymore." Samuel turned his face away, jaw tight. Guilt rose like bile in his throat. "I fought at Bitter Ridge," he said, his voice low. "I know," Nita answered. He froze. Her eyes stayed on him. "You were the one who let the women leave." The room held its breath. "I saw you," she continued, "when the fires were dying and the guns stopped. You stood at the edge of the camp, blood on your face. You looked at me and turned away." He hadn't called out, hadn't stopped her. He'd just stood there, frozen, torn between orders and something older than hatred. "That spared my life," she said. Samuel sat down on the edge of the cot, the ache in his back nothing compared to what rose in his chest. "I was with child then. 2, Nita added. But that baby didn't survive. I buried her before dawn. He didn't respond. Couldn't. And then, softly, Nita said, I don't hate you, Samuel Holloway. Her words landed like snowfall, quiet, soft, and strangely heavy. I buried hate with Waya. Hate would have killed me long before the winter did. Samuel looked at her, really looked. This wasn't a warrior. This wasn't a threat. This was a mother, a widow, a woman whose pain mirrored his in shape if not in cause. What's the boy's name? He asked quietly. Coho, she said. It means strong heart. He nodded, slowly. The fire popped, the baby stirred, and for a moment, the war between them quieted. But peace is a fragile thing in the West, especially when it walks with the name of a wanted woman. Have you ever carried the weight of something too old to fix? Let us know in the comments. And if this moment between enemies turned survivors moved you, stay close. The storm hasn't passed yet. The dead feel no pain, she had whispered. But the living carry every cut. That night, the wind howled again, but something inside the barn had changed. Samuel didn't speak much after Nita's words. He hadn't meant to sit so long by the cot, but his legs didn't move. His mind kept circling one truth she had offered without pride or apology. She had buried her hate. He hadn't. He'd just dressed it in silence and called it survival. The fire cast warm, flickering light across the wood plank walls. Lena lay curled on a mat of old cloth by the stove, her arms around the baby. Samuel watched the boy's chest rise and fall, tiny, shallow, but steady now. That soft, fragile rhythm tethered something inside Samuel he hadn't felt in years. Clara had always wanted children. They'd tried, lost 2 early on. The 3rd pregnancy had come just before the raids. He never got to hear that child's cry. Now, the sound of Coho's breath filled the space like a song. Samuel didn't know the words to, but felt in his bones. He rose quietly, stepped out into the main barn. Stars glittered above the roofline, sharp and bright. He drew in a breath that stung his lungs, trying to shake the tightness in his chest. When he returned, Nita was awake again, half sitting with effort. Her cheeks were sunken, eyes rimmed in fatigue, but she still hummed soft, rhythmic, in a language he couldn't name, but instinctively knew was old. It wasn't for him. It was for the child. Maybe for herself. Samuel stood near the stove and listened. That song, he said after a moment. What does it mean? It's a prayer, Nita replied, voice hoarse. To the wind, to carry sorrow away and not bring it back. Does it work? Sometimes, she said, and gave him a faint smile. Over the next days, a rhythm settled, tentative, uneven, but real. Nita began to move more. She sat up longer, helped mash oats for Lena and Coho. Her hands, once shaking, now stitched quiet rows across Samuel's torn coat. She spoke little, but when she did, her voice carried weight. Not command, not pity, just presence. And Samuel, he started listening for things he used to ignore. The sound of the baby cooing, the shuffle of Lena sweeping the corners of the barn, the scrape of wood as Nita folded blankets. They weren't just noises. They were proof that life soft, fragile, undeserved life had made a place on his land. One morning, he caught Nita out by the woodpile. She was thinner than ever, her breath short in the cold. But her grip on the axe was steady. You shouldn't be doing that, he said. Stepping closer, she didn't look up. I've chopped worse things. Samuel didn't answer. He took the axe from her gently and finished the job. That night, as they shared a pot of boiled beans and cornmeal, Lena surprised them both. Did you ever lose someone? She asked, her small voice breaking the stillness. Samuel paused. Yes, he said quietly. My wife, Clara. Lena tilted her head. Was she pretty? She was brave, he replied. Sang off key, laughed loud. And she always burned the biscuits. Nita looked up from her stitching, saying nothing. But Samuel saw the softness in her eyes. How did she die? Lena asked. Samuel's jaw tightened. An arrow. During a raid. I'm sorry, Lena whispered. He nodded once. Me too. Then, without thinking, he reached for another log, and tossed it into the fire. The room lit brighter, warmer. He didn't know it yet, but something inside him had shifted. Not a grand revelation, not forgiveness, but the start of something that felt like it might one day become home. And soon, a crack in the warmth. Because peace is never left alone for long. Have you ever had someone break down the walls you didn't know you'd built? If so, let us know in the comments. And if this moment stirred something quiet in you, like it did in Samuel, give this story a like. Or share it with someone who still believes healing is possible. Some wounds don't bleed anymore. They just wait for a glance, a memory, a mark to open again. The snow had eased, but the cold lingered like a thought you couldn't shake. That morning, the barn was quiet. Lena fed Coho while Nita mended a worn leather strap from Samuel's saddle. He had just returned from checking the creek, ice thick along its edges. When he stepped inside and saw her sleeve slip, he didn't mean to look. But there it was, clear as fire on dry grass, a faded ink mark on her inner wrist, 2 arrows crossing beneath a rising sun. Samuel froze. The fire in the stove crackled behind him. He heard Coho let out a soft hiccup, but all he could see was that symbol, the seal of Wya's bloodline. Wya, the war chief, whose name still echoed in the nightmares of old soldiers, who held Red Creek against superior numbers with little more than grit and fury, who took lives without apology, whose arrow had ended Clara's laughter. And this woman, Nita, had carried his child, had worn his name, had shared his fire. "You didn't tell me," Samuel said quietly. Nita looked up, surprised at first. Then she saw what he'd seen. She didn't cover the mark, didn't flinch, only pulled the needle from the leather and set it down with deliberate calm. "You didn't ask," she replied. The words weren't defensive, just true. Samuel's hands curled at his sides. His pulse was a slow drumbeat in his ears. "You were his wife," he said. "I was." He took a step back. Nita met his gaze level, unshaken. "I didn't know he'd fall at Bitter Ridge," she said. "Didn't know you'd be there either. I was already carrying Coho." Her voice didn't tremble. It carried like wind through pine. Samuel sat on the edge of the workbench, the wood cold beneath him. He stared at the dirt floor. "I buried Clara the morning after Red Creek," he said. Nita nodded. "Once. I buried Wya at Bitter Ridge." They didn't speak for a while. Just 2 people breathing in the same space, full of things unsaid. "I've hated your people," Samuel admitted, voice hoarse. "Blamed every arrow, every raid." "I know," she said. "But not every arrow was his, and not every loss wears a uniform." She lifted her wrist, turned it over, showing the mark again. "I loved him, but I did not follow his war." Samuel looked at her, really looked. This wasn't a warrior. Not anymore. This was a woman who had crossed frozen valleys with a child in her arms. Not for glory, but for shelter, for mercy. She had a past, so did he. But maybe mercy didn't come after innocence. Maybe it came after understanding. He exhaled. "I don't know what to do with this." He confessed. "You don't have to do anything," Nita replied. "You've already done more than most." He stood slowly, the tension in his chest easing, not gone, but looser, like a bandage unwrapped. As he walked toward the stove, Coho gurgled, and Lena giggled softly. Life, still fragile, still present. Samuel knelt, stirred the pot on the fire, and asked, "He teach you how to ride?" Nita blinked, then smiled, soft and unexpected. "No, I taught him." They both chuckled, the sound awkward, but real. Outside, a breeze stirred, and not far from the ranch, nailed to a post in the next town over, a piece of parchment flapped against the wind, waiting for someone to read what should never have been written. Next, the wanted poster, the closing distance of bootsteps, and the choice between hiding or standing firm. He hadn't heard laughter in that barn since Clara, but one morning it slipped through the cracks, small, shy, and soft, and it stayed. The poster hadn't arrived yet, but the wind carried a different kind of news into the barn, now less biting, less hollow. There were still long silences between Samuel and Nita, but they no longer felt like walls, more like rest stops between 2 people, too tired to speak, but not too bitter to stay. Each day followed a rhythm that, if not exactly peaceful, was at least known. Samuel would fetch water and check the traps. Lena swept, folded, and sang lullabies to Coho, half in English, half in Apache. Nita cooked what little they had with skilled hands and steady silence. Her voice was still rough, but when she hummed, even the wind seemed to pause and listen. One night, as Samuel returned from stacking chopped wood, he paused outside the barn. The light flickered beneath the crack in the door. Inside, he heard Nita's voice, low and melodic, not words, a lullaby. She sang to Coho in Apache, rocking him gently, while Lena braided old cloth into new doll hair. The fire glowed warm across their faces. Her hair was loose again, falling like midnight across her shoulders. She looked tired, but not worn. He stood for a while, just listening. Then, quietly, he stepped in and placed more wood beside the stove. "That song," he said, voice breaking the hush. "Does it have a name?" Nita looked up. "It means the winter will not win." "Ah." Samuel gave a slow nod, then sat by the stove. "I like it," he said. She smiled. Later that week, Lena handed him a folded square of cloth awkwardly stitched, uneven at the corners. "I made you a napkin," she said proudly. Samuel opened it. There was a crooked little horse sewn in red thread. "That's Scout," Lena added. "Mama said your old horse was named that." Samuel looked at Nita. She didn't speak, but he knew she'd remembered from a passing word, a glance toward the empty stall. He folded the napkin carefully and placed it in his coat pocket. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something warmer than hatred, truer than pity, and more solid than ghosts. It was the start of choosing one another, in chores, in silence, in small acts of care that didn't demand a thank you. Nita began helping with repairs. Her hands, though still thin, were sure wrapping reins, oiling hinges, stitching canvas with practiced ease. Samuel watched her quietly, noting the way she leaned into the work like she belonged here. Once, she brushed snow off his shoulders as he entered, fingers lingering an extra second. He didn't flinch. That night, after supper, Samuel sat by the stove polishing his boots. Lena leaned against him, sleepy. Coho was gurgling from the cot. Nita read aloud from a torn book in halting English. The fire crackled. Samuel closed his eyes for a moment, and for the first time in years, the sound inside the barn wasn't only wind and wood. It was life, thin but real, woven together from ash and will and second chances. But nothing in the West stays warm for long. And that next morning, down in the village, someone finally noticed the name missing from a report and sent 4 riders with cold eyes and colder orders. Have you ever built something small but sacred, something no one else would understand? Let us know in the comments. And if this quiet kind of love speaks to your heart, share this story with someone who still believes the fire is worth lighting. It wasn't the name that stopped him. There was no name, just the description. And he knew her. The blacksmith's forge hissed, steam rising as iron met snowmelt. Samuel stood by the open flame, waiting for a horseshoe to cool. It had been a quiet ride into town, too quiet. He'd meant only to trade for oats and nails, then head home before the sun slipped too low. But then he saw it, pinned to the timber post behind the smith's anvil, flapping slightly in the wind. Wanted, female, Apache descent, approx. 25 years. Escaped detainment near Fort Lowell. Suspected of aiding armed resistance during childbirth, fled north with 2 minors. Considered a threat. Samuel didn't need a name, didn't need a sketch. He knew the description by heart. The blacksmith glanced sideways, voice low. 4 soldiers came through at dawn. Gray coats. Asked about a woman and 2 kids. Said she's dangerous. Samuel's hand curled into a fist. Not because they were looking, but because they were close. How far from Fort Lowell? He asked. 2, maybe 3 days hard ride, the blacksmith answered. Less if they've got orders and something to prove. Samuel said nothing more. He mounted up and rode out of town as fast as the frost allowed. The road back to the ranch felt longer than usual, though his horse moved fast. His mind was racing faster. He'd known peace was temporary, had felt it in his bones. The kind of life they'd built couldn't last, not with marks on wrists and stories in blood, but he'd hoped, foolishly, That winter would hold them a little longer. When he reached the barn, the sun was already slipping low behind the hills. Nita was hanging damp cloth near the stove, Lena sweeping, Coho asleep in the cradle, made from an old crate and a saddle blanket. She saw his face before he said a word. "What happened?" she asked, voice already steady. He handed her the poster. She unfolded it slowly, read it once. Her fingers trembled. "It's me," she whispered. Lena stopped sweeping. "No." Nita placed a gentle hand on her daughter's head. "I have to go." "You're not strong enough," Samuel said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "I'm strong enough to walk. You'll freeze before you reach the canyon. Then I'll freeze far from here," she said. "I won't bring death to your door." He turned away, pacing. The barn groaned under the wind. "You think this is what I want," he muttered. "To watch you disappear into the dark, into snow and silence. It's better than watching me hanged for treason," she said, quietly. He spun, eyes burning. "I already stood still once. When Clara died, I let rage carry me. Orders blind me. I did what they said, never questioned. Not until it was too late." Nita said nothing. "I looked away at Bitter Ridge, not because I was noble, but because I couldn't take another mother's blood." She stepped forward, face pale but calm. "And now, I won't look away again." Their eyes met, and in that quiet, Samuel made a decision that didn't come from the mind, but from the scarred, stubborn piece of his soul that still believed in second chances. "You stay," he said. "You and the children. I'll fight if I have to." Nita reached out, her fingers rough and warm on his wrist. "You would die for me." He shook his head. "I'll live for you, and I'll protect this for as long as I can." That night, as the wind rose and snow clawed at the windows, Samuel sat by the barn door, rifle across his lap, not for vengeance, but for something far more dangerous in the West: hope. Next, the soldiers return. The trap is sprung, and Samuel must buy time the only way he knows how, by walking back into fire. The last time Samuel Holloway picked up a rifle with fire in his chest, it was for revenge. This time it was for something fragile enough to be broken, but brave enough to be worth saving. The moon hung low and red, casting long, uneasy shadows across the hills. Samuel crouched behind a line of rocks above the tree line, watching the glow of a distant fire, 4 tents near a frozen creek, 2 horses tethered, and boots scattered like bones near the edge of camp. 6 men, maybe 7, all gray coats, all armed, the ones hunting her. They thought she was still in the barn, thought he was just a rancher trying to outlast another winter. They didn't know she was already gone, hidden deep in the canyons by torchlight, with Lena and Coho, and enough blankets to buy them a single night's lead. Samuel whispered a prayer he hadn't said since the war, then checked the flask of kerosene strapped to his belt. Just enough. He moved like a shadow through the snow, every breath measured, every step a memory of the soldier he used to be. First, the horses. He crept to the post, whispered to the mare. She turned her head, huffed quietly. He sliced the rope. Then the second, slapped both haunches hard. They bolted into the pines. The camp erupted in motion. Men shouted, scrambled for rifles. Samuel ducked low and lit the fuse on the kerosene line he'd poured along the base of the supply tent. It caught fast, flames licking the canvas like a hungry mouth. Chaos. Boots stomped, orders barked, and Samuel circled back around the camp's rear where the firelight cast long shadows, and panic drew eyes elsewhere. One man stayed behind, bent near a crate, older, broad-shouldered, familiar. The scar along his cheek stopped Samuel cold. Lieutenant Crowley, Bitter Ridge, the man who gave the order that day, Samuel Holloway. Crowley squinted into the dark. "I'll be damned." Before he could lift his pistol, Samuel lunged. They grappled in the snow, grunting, fists colliding like thunder on wood. Crowley slammed him into a tree. Samuel drove his knee into the man's ribs. The pistol clattered away. Samuel grabbed a stone and brought it down once, twice. Crowley went limp. Samuel stood, chest heaving, blood in his mouth. The fire behind him roared louder. He didn't wait. He ran. By the time he reached the ranch again, the sun was clawing its way over the horizon. But the gate was wrong. No tracks led in, but plenty led out. The barn door was open. Inside, an overturned cot, a scattered quilt, Lena's doll, its head cracked against the post, and footprints too many. They had taken them. Nita, Lena, the baby. Samuel fell to one knee, fists trembling. The rage returned, not the hot kind that burns fast, but the cold kind. The kind that doesn't blink, doesn't forget. He stood, saddled the horse, and this time, he didn't ride to warn. He rode to take them back. The snow howled through the canyon as he followed the trail wagon ruts, boot prints, a dropped piece of wool cloth from Lena's shawl. By dusk, he saw the smoke again. A second camp. Same men, same fire. He left the horse behind, took only his rifle. His breath was shallow. His ribs ached. But his heart had never been clearer. He moved through the trees, closer, closer, and then he saw her. Nita, bound near the wagon, Lena beside her. The baby silent in her arms. Samuel raised his rifle and fired. Old friends turned enemies, a river of ice, and a final choice beneath a sky full of bullets. When was the last time you fought for something that couldn't defend itself? If this chapter kept you holding your breath, let us know below and share it with someone who still believes some things are worth the risk. Take the baby and run, he said, but she didn't run. She came back for him because sometimes love looks like turning toward the bullets, not away from them. The shot had shattered the stillness. Not a fatal blow, but enough to throw Samuel backward, shoulder jerking, blood blooming across the front of his coat like fire through snow. Lena screamed. Nita moved without thinking. She bit through the knot on her wrist, kicked loose from the wagon post, and grabbed the baby. Lena untie the rest. Now. The girl's small fingers fumbled fast, tears streaking her cheeks, but her hands didn't shake. Samuel tried to rise, but the world tilted sideways. He tasted copper, heard boots slamming the earth behind him. Go, he rasped. Don't wait, go. But Nita was already beside him. She crouched low, eyes fierce, and threw his arm over her shoulders. I told you, she growled. I will not leave you. He couldn't argue. Not with her fire, not with the way Lena pulled Coho close to her chest, like a shield made of love. Not with the way the bullets screamed through the trees like ghosts that refused to die. They mounted the horse together, Nita first, then Lena, then Samuel slumping behind, barely conscious. She kicked hard. The animal lunged forward, hooves cutting through frozen ground, as more shots cracked through the dusk. Behind them, Sergeant Ellis Greycoat, scarred jaw shouted, Holloway, don't be a damn fool, but Samuel didn't turn back. Because he wasn't running from justice. He was running to something, to life, to the second chance they had built in silence and shared glances and stitched up coats. The trail bent toward the river, a wide stretch of frozen water Samuel had crossed many winters ago, shallow in places, cracked in others. It was the fastest way to Mexico. And the most dangerous. Hold tight, Nita yelled over the wind. The horse hit the ice, cracked, slid, recovered. Gunfire echoed behind them. Samuel forced his eyes open, saw Lena, holding the baby close, whispering something only a sister could say. Saw Nita lean forward, urging the horse faster, faster, like she could outpace the past. They hit the far bank with a jolt. The horse stumbled, but did not fall. Then came the open plain, the final stretch, and no more gunshots, just wind and breath, and the sound of a child beginning to cry again, not from fear, but from being alive. They crossed into Mexico under a sky streaked with flame. Nita pulled the reins, slowed the horse, and let it stop. Samuel slid off, crumpled to the ground. Breath ragged. Stay with me, she said, kneeling beside him. He blinked up at the stars. We made it, she nodded. We did, he coughed. Told you. You should have run. She pressed her forehead to his. I did, but only after I found you. Behind them, Lena held Coho, eyes wide, face smudged with snow and soot, but safe, and watching, always watching. That night, they slept under a blanket of borrowed silence, and when the morning came, the sun rose not on fugitives, but on a family, that had outrun death, crossed borders not just of land, but of the heart. 1 year later, a field of corn, a letter to the past, and a man with a new name who finally learns what it means to stay. Some men disappear to be forgotten, others disappear to begin again. 1 year later, the hills of Sonora rolled gold beneath the summer sun. Rows of corn stretched in neat, swaying lines, stubborn, proud, and taller than a child's outstretched arms. A man moved slowly between them. Hu and Hunt, sweat darkening the back of his shirt. He walked with a limp now, shoulder stiff where the bullet had gone clean through. But his steps were sure. His name, in this village, was Mateo Sandville, not Samuel Holloway. That name had died in the snow, somewhere between a burning camp and a frozen river. What rose in its place was not a soldier, nor a ghost, but something quieter, something rooted, nearby. Coho toddled across the field chasing a butterfly, his laugh bright and wet with joy. Lena sat under a jacaranda tree, reading a book aloud in 2 languages, Apache and Spanish, her voice slow, careful, her pride enormous. Down the path, children's voices drifted from the adobe schoolhouse. Inside, Nita stood at the chalkboard, her hair wrapped in a scarf, her sleeves rolled. She taught with the patience of someone who had known silence too long. Her words weren't loud, but they landed. Samuel often paused in the middle of the rows, leaned on his hoe, and simply watched, not because he couldn't believe it, but because he finally could. At dusk, on the porch of their small home, he opened an old letter. The edges were frayed, the ink faded. He'd written it months ago, but never sent it. Addressed to someone buried deep beneath Wyoming snow. Clara, you were my first home, but not my last. I thought nothing would ever grow again where grief burned through me. I was wrong. Nita didn't replace you. She walked beside your memory, not over it. And somehow, we found a way to build something from what was left behind. I loved you. I still do. But I don't have to live in your shadow anymore. I've found the sun again. He folded the letter, placed it in a wooden box, and slid it beneath the porch. Beside him, the door creaked open. Nita stepped out barefoot, hands dusted with flour. "Dinner's ready," she said. He smiled. "Smells like beans again. It's what the land gives," she teased. He reached for her hand, kissed the knuckles. "The land's been generous. Some stories don't end with a kiss. They end with a quiet choice to stay, to live, to love again, without letting go of what came before." Later that evening, after supper, the lantern burned low. Outside, the wind danced gently across the cornfields, soft and unhurried. Lena rocked Coho on the porch, humming a tune she'd picked up from Nita, half lullaby, half prayer. Inside, Samuel sat by the fire, wooden box on his lap, the same one he kept under the floorboards, beneath the rifle he hadn't reached for in months. He opened it. The folded letter rested on top, the one addressed to Clara. He ran a finger across the creases. He didn't cry. He hadn't for a long time, not because he no longer felt the loss, but because it no longer ruled him. He placed the letter back into the box, closed it gently, and this time, he didn't slide it beneath the floor. He left it in plain sight on the shelf near the door, as if to say, "She is part of this house, too." Nita entered quietly, wiping her hands on a cloth. "She's still with you?" she asked, glancing at the box. Samuel nodded. "Always will be, but not the same way." Nita walked over, sat beside him, and leaned into his shoulder. "You don't have to forget her," she whispered. "I know," he said. "I don't want to." The fire crackled between them. Then, faintly, Coho giggled outside, chasing fireflies in the dark. Lena called out after him, laughing, and for the first time, Samuel didn't brace against the sound. He let it wash over him, let it settle. Nita looked up at him. "What does it feel like?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "Like breathing easy," he said. "Like grief finally got tired of following me." She smiled. And there, in the quiet, in the warmth of a house built on memory and second chances, Samuel Holloway, now Mateo Sandville, wrapped his arm around the woman who didn't fix him, but chose him anyway. Some stories begin in blood, some in silence, but the ones that last begin again and again. with the courage to stay, and this one did. If this story held your heart all the way to the end, leave us a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe love can grow from ashes, share this with someone who might need to hear it.